You guys, we're doing it. We're going solo. Welcome to the very first solo episode of She's Got Game. I was recently in a Q&A interview at Nike and some of the feedback was really cool. So it got me thinking, why not recreate the same experience here for everyone listening along at home? So I'm going to ask myself exactly the same questions that I was asked as part of this interview. And I'm going to answer as openly and as honestly as possible so you can get a little bit of insight into what has shaped my journey so far, why She's Got Game was born, and hopefully there'll be a few takeaways in there for you too. So let's get into it. Question number one. Your journey into fitness started incredibly young, and you've achieved a huge amount already, from founding an online platform to hosting a podcast to consulting across the industry. Was there a defining moment that pushed you to follow this path, especially at such a young age? So, my career or my interest in sport started super young. I signed up to my local athletics club when I was about 6 years old, and I was doing cross country. For those who have not experienced the grueling nature of cross country, oh my God, I envy you. It was amazing for my mindset in so many ways. And it was such a defining part of my life, not just my career, not just my childhood, but my life going forwards. I really, really remember this one training session. We were in the park on a Saturday morning. It was our last set, and we were doing some hill sprints. And we've been doing probably about, I don't know, let's call it 30 meters at the time. And then for the last one, our coach said, right, you can all come forwards. We're just going to do 20 meters on this last sprint. And I remember just walking up to the 30-meter line and being like, no, I'm going to do the 30 meters. I've got it in me. I don't want to do the 20. And I didn't think much of it. And I must have honestly been about 7 years old at the time. And I remember the coach going, that's an athlete mindset. So before I even really knew what I was doing, and it wasn't necessarily a conscious decision, I feel like I had that mindset and I was drawn to that mindset of an athlete. And from there on out, I have just lived life as if I was one. I love having that structure and that routine, which I think for some people can be a little bit mundane. But if you put me at a desk 9 to 5 in front of a screen, I will do nothing. I will not be productive. I may last a day, but then I am tapping out. I am handing in my letter of resignation. Kudos to those people who can do that, because I am not one of those people. But a really, really defining moment for me was when I was about 18 years old. So I'd had this whole childhood of sport. After cross country, I got more into track and athletics. And then I went into netball, hockey, badminton, tennis, you name it, I played it. And then when I was in my teens, I became really aware of cellulite. When I was about 14, I was scouted by a modeling agency. I had no interest in modeling. I didn't know what it was, but my mum told me I couldn't do it. And me being me, I was like, okay, I'm going to do that then. Even though it was never something that was on my radar, I then became quite fixated by this idea. And with the societal pressures of beauty being pretty petite, cellulite is not a thing. You have beautiful, clear skin, you have washboard abs. That then became my goal. And rather than seeing what my body was capable of doing and focusing on the performance, I became so laser focused on the aesthetics, to the point where I would even Google who the top models were. I would go and have a look at what their weight was, and I'd be like, that's what I need to get to. So I hit about 17 and I started going to the gym, because in the UK, that is about the time where you're doing your A levels. Kind of 16, 17 is when things start to get pretty serious pre going to university. And I was also at a college where sport wasn't really championed in the same way it had been for me in my early years growing up. So I started going to the gym, even though I thought, well, why would you go to the gym when you could play sport? And I quite quickly fell in love with seeing what my body could do again. But there was a trainer there who was about 40 years old. Reminder, I was 17. And he saw me training and he came over and he was like, what are you training for? It looks like you're training for performance. I wasn't. I was 20 minutes on the cross trainer, 20 minutes of abs. That was my routine every single day. And he really ended up manipulating and abusing his position of power with me, to the point where he would give sports massages. he asked to use me as a guinea pig whilst he was on his course. He would get me to strip down into nothing but my underwear, and I felt incredibly uncomfortable, but I didn't know any better. I was impressionable. I had this idea of what I wanted to achieve in order to become a model, but also I wanted to disappear. At this point, I had had a few friendships that hadn't worked out, and I felt really hurt by them. I'd been in a relationship that was so toxic. I mean, I was a kid, I was 15, but again, I was not in a good place. And I didn't really feel like I knew where life was going. And I was a kid. No one knows where life is going at that point. But he latched onto that, and he would say things like, "Can you feel that cellulite in the backs of your legs?" when he was giving me a sports massage. And to say that to any woman, let alone a teenage girl at such a pivotal point in their life where they are trying to figure out who they are, their confidence is at an all-time low, they have no idea which direction their life is going in, is so beyond manipulative. It is not okay. And he went on to be even worse later down the line, sending me quite abusive messages, asking me to send pictures of him in my underwear, the less clothes, the better. And then he started to threaten me. So I stopped going to the gym because I did not want to see this guy. I felt so embarrassed and ashamed and felt like it was my fault with what had happened that I didn't even tell my parents for about a month. And then when I did tell them, they felt guilt as well, even though I hadn't let them into what was going on because I felt this shame. So I stopped going to the gym, but because I become so fixated on body image and being small and being petite and wanting to disappear and just isolate and remove myself from all these situations, I then took to food and I developed a disorder called orthorexia. And this is where you are, they say, how they describe it is you're obsessed with being as healthy as possible. So that means I wouldn't eat the stalk of a broccoli because it had more carbs in than the head of it. This is how extreme it got. And I was so underweight and I was so unhappy. And my mental health was through the floor. It's one of the lowest points in my life. I went off traveling. I qualified as a yoga teacher in India, which was amazing. But I remember the day I landed, or the second day I was there, I'd gone for the physical, but we were doing some more philosophy-based sessions. And it really hit me. And I just wrote this email to my mum. Yes, email, not text. I wrote her a long old email because it was essentially a letter. And I broke down into tears. And that was when I knew something was wrong and I needed to change. But I still had 6, 7 more months of traveling ahead of me. So I suppressed, I shut it down, and I carried on. And I did not get better. I didn't even focus on getting better. None of that until I got home. And I went to basically a car boot sale with my mum and my nana. And my nana at the time had recently developed Parkinson's. And I remember just not even being able to carry this chair that my mum had bought, a pretty light wooden chair. I couldn't carry it back to the car. And I remember sitting on the floor by the car, looking at my nana and just thinking, I cannot let her see me like this for the last few years of her life. And that's when I just started bawling my eyes out and I turned to my mum and I was like, I need help. So that was the most pivotal moment in my life as to switching back then to training for performance and seeing what my body could do. But at the time, I hadn't had a period for years. So my goal was to get my period back. I qualified as a PT. We'll come on to that story later on. But I then met someone on that course who was a godsend. And to this day, John, who moved to Canada, I honestly think saved me in so many ways. And he helped me, one, feel safe around an older male again in a one-to-one situation, which I did not feel safe anymore. And he educated me on nutrition and training beyond what you learn when you go and do your personal training course. And I signed up to that course because Joe Wicks, a body coach, was doing all these get fit in 12 weeks programs. And because I'd done my yoga teacher training, I'd come back with this real sustainable mindset of being like, why is it only lasting 12 weeks? Why not longer? So I put together a business plan and I needed to do my personal training course for insurance purposes. That was the only thing. I needed the insurance so I could put together a more sustainable plan. Long story short, fell into PTing and here we are 10 years later, absolutely loving what I am doing. But if it wasn't for John, who helped me really fall in love with understanding the science and the why, I may not have gone down that route as fully as I have now. So, two pivotal moments for me at the very, very start when I was 6 years old, and I realized my love for sport and the impact sport had had on me already. And then again in my late teens, where I'd fallen out of the habit of training for what my body could do and training for what my body could look like instead. And it was the lowest point of my life. So I then realized how much movement could help me coming out the back of that. I started training for strength. I started seeing what I was capable of again. I didn't do any cardio, even though I love cardio and I missed it. My sole purpose at the time was to get my hormones back in check and to get back to a healthy weight. And I fell in love with the process again. And I realized, wow, that is life changing. And I want to do that for others. So that is how I then got into the career that I am in now. And hopefully, those listening at home may resonate with certain pieces of that story, or you may know people going through a similar thing, and just how powerful movement can be. And it can pull you through the darkest moments of your life, along with therapy. I did do that as well. But movement has so much more power than you think. Okay, next question. You started training clients at 19 and now lead a global platform focused on women's health. What were some of the biggest challenges you faced as a woman in this space, and how did you overcome them? Okay, so two really come to mind. The first one was I was delivering a small group personal training session, and I was the first female coach they'd had in a long time. They'd mainly been coached by men. And I was coaching a group of about 6 men who 6 a.m. every day, they're in, they do their sessions, they know where they're at, they like to hit it hard. And I really felt like I had to earn the right to be listened to. Whereas with the women, I didn't really feel that. I feel like they were so bought in from the get-go. But I had to work hard with these guys in order for them to accept that kind of authoritative figure, and that, hey, she does know what she's talking about. She's here to help us. She wants us to succeed. We're going to listen. But initially it felt a bit like, oh, what do you know? So that felt like a little bit of a barrier for me. And it didn't last too long because they were all great. It was just I had to work harder to get that buy-in and to be listened to than I did with women. It came much more naturally in that relationship. The other one was, this was probably about 4 years ago. I've been brought on as head of women's at this company. And so the idea of highlighting and prioritizing women in fitness was there, and that we need different program to men was there, which is great. However, I really remember being in this meeting of all guys, and there was something going on where someone hadn't completed something by the time they needed to, which meant the rest of us couldn't then do our bit. So we were a bit behind schedule. And I asked when it would be done by. I got snapped at. So I went internal and I went quiet, because at the time that was my way of dealing with confrontation, because I was about 24, 25. I didn't have the confidence in that male dominated space to be like, that's not cool. Please don't do that. So I went quiet. And as a result, he then said to me at the end of the meeting, oh, you must be due on your period. In front of these people, in front of these guys, not a single other woman in the room. And I just thought, wow, we are in, I think at the time, 2022, and you are still saying that? How are you still saying that? The reason I've gone internal and what may be perceived to you as grumpy and standoffish is not because I'm due on my period. It's because you were just really rude to me. How would you like me to respond to that? But the lesson I learned from it, and I actually really liked him. We did get on really, really well. He's a great guy. Just in that situation, that wasn't great. But it just made me feel like, okay, so we're ticking this box. We've got this women's program. We are acknowledging that. But actually, your view of women in this space hasn't changed, and it needs to. And that fundamentally needs to change before you can then go and do anything good with this program, because you don't fully believe or buy into it just yet. We need you to in order for it to become a success. What that really taught me was that, okay, I now know how to handle those situations and those conversations better. So as much as it wasn't great at the time and it was a barrier, and I felt like, okay, I think maybe we're not on the same wavelength here, It taught me to really know how to go into conversations like that with confidence going forwards. And the great thing is, you have less and less of those conversations as you go forwards because you show up as a version of yourself where people don't feel like they can talk to you like that. And it's not because they're intimidated by you, it's because you really believe in who you are, you know who you are, you know what you stand for, and you will not surround yourself with people who question, doubt, or attack that. You will be surrounded by really cool people who are on board, and vice versa. You choose to be around people that you are on board with because that is where these amazing relationships form. So, every situation is a learning curve and a lesson. And in a way, I'm grateful for that period and that time because it's really helped me with certain situations going forwards. But that was a barrier and it was a wake up call. And it was a moment where I was like, maybe this is not the environment I belong in. And I didn't feel like it was, I'm getting pushed out. That was not it. It wasn't that, okay, I don't belong here, I'm going to leave. It was, I don't want to belong here because I don't like that current mindset. So for anyone in situations like that, I would say the best way to overcome it, maybe leave. Maybe that is the best option for you, is to leave and insert yourself in a new environment that really suits you. And that is not you giving up. That is what you need. And that is great. And that is fine. And I am all for change, even though it sometimes feels scary. Another option is to maybe talk with people around you who really understand you and can help you widen your toolbox to be able to pull on certain things when you're in those uncomfortable situations to allow you to stand for who you are and make sure those situations don't happen again. So we overcame the barrier, guys. We moved forwards. We then created the female training program and we are where we are now. So everything has worked out for the best. But yes, I have come across a couple of barriers in the industry. All right, next one. This is a little bit more about training and mindset. So we're talking about approach to training here, which for me, it needs to be super intentional and aligned with your values. What habits or routines have contributed most to your success, both physically and mentally? Off the back of what we were just talking about, listening to your gut and finding out who your people are has attributed to where I'm at in my life and my career more than training, more than therapy, I would even say. Well, therapy helps you listen to your gut and trust yourself, but having good people around you is going to boost you up and propel you forwards more than if you're in situations where you don't feel fully supported. Sport has been such an integral part of my life, and the lessons I've learned from sport in terms of team playing, leadership, listening, communicating, sharing, knowing when to shut up and let someone else lead, but also knowing when actually it might be my turn to pull this team along, and I can do that and I can do it with confidence. And I also think the other amazing thing about sport is when you put yourself in the arena and you set yourself challenges, you really realize what you're made of. And you're often capable of so much more than you think you are. The other incredible thing about it is that you learn how to manage people without having to go on a course or your job sending you off to do something so you can get some managerial skills. You understand what your teammates respond to. Some teammates might respond well to you yelling at them. Some need a cuddle and they just need you to sit and listen. And that is exactly what day-to-day life is like. That is what office life is like. You need to be able to understand what certain people respond best to. And sport really, really did that for me. So in terms of success, the people around you are going to get you there. So if you can understand how people work and you want to understand how people work rather than just ticking a box, it's genuinely intriguing to you, that will propel you so much faster and further forward in your life than if you try and hack everything out solo and just do it by yourself. Next question. You've talked openly about struggling with an eating disorder in your late teens. How has that shaped your mission with the female training program? So we've touched on this already, but it just made me really realize, one, how important movement is for your mental health as well as physical, but also how when you set yourself a performance goal, the aesthetics are a byproduct. And I'm not going to tell you that aesthetics are not part of my goals because that's a lie. I want to feel great in my body. And I know when I look a certain way, I feel that. And for me, that's athletic. I like to look athletic. I like to feel athletic. I like to perform well in the gym. That gives me confidence. That is why I created the female training program, because I want other women to experience that too. It's let's chase some performance goals. Let's prove to ourselves that we can do chin ups, we can do push ups, we can deadlift, we can do all of these things that maybe we thought we couldn't, and how that then transfers over into everyday life. And your aesthetics are going to come along with you. The other side of it is getting women to really listen to their body and tap in to their menstrual cycle and their hormonal fluctuations. So, how I tend to program is, in terms of recovery, every 4 to 6 weeks, we want to take a deload week anyway, which is where we back off, we reduce the intensity or the volume or both. Up to you how you respond best to that. I tend to do that in line with the menstrual cycle, because the week before women are due on their period tends to be when it is hardest for us to recover and hit intensity. So the female training program is completely designed with that in mind, but you can auto regulate. So it's also giving you that autonomy of going, I'm supposed to deload this week, but I'm actually feeling pretty good. So even though it says X, I think I can push that a bit today. So you can do it. Or going, wow, my energy is not there today. I can't hit that. But you know what? It's totally cool if I don't, because now is the best time for me to pull back and rest and recover, so that next week, when things are working in my favor to hit those intensities and I don't need as much rest and recovery, I'm good to go and I can fly. So my experience of having that real low with having that eating disorder has really inspired me to help other women try to not go down that route and go down the route of, let's get you feeling great. Let's give you confidence, not only with your training, but in understanding your body, and then how that all transfers over to your everyday life. Okay, next one. Self-doubt is something a lot of us experience. Yes, we do, especially in fast-paced or performance-driven environments. How do you deal with imposter syndrome or moments of self-doubt? My best bit of advice is do the thing. So whenever I felt imposter syndrome, it's normally in an area where I feel like I've got areas of knowledge lacking, or I have a lack of experience. To gain the experience, you got to do the thing. So that will help in one sense. On the other side, if you feel like there are areas of your knowledge that are missing, go and learn more. There are so many people out there these days that you can learn from, be it a one-to-one mentor, which I tend to love, or even TikTok, YouTube, Instagram. There are so many free sources of information out there these days that if you have gaps, you can fill them. And the more you fill them, the more confidence you have, the less likely that imposter syndrome is going to creep in on as much of a regular basis. But it's always going to be there a little bit, and that's fine. And it's just learning how to manage it. The first time you go and do something, you're going to question yourself if you're capable of doing it. But the more you do it, and the more you learn, and the more you understand, the better you're going to get at it, and the less anxiety you're going to feel. When your clients hit mental or physical walls, how do you help them break through? My main thing here is, let's go back to the why. Why are we chasing this goal? What is the reason? And why have we hit this stumbling block? Why can we not break through it? Why have we plateaued or gone backwards? And a lot of the time when we zoom out, it's actually nothing to do with the training itself. It's to do with external life stresses. God knows we have so many of those. It could be work, it could be kids, it could be relationship, it could be stress. I mean, stress, umbrella blanket, that covers it all. If you're having a bit of a block in your training, the likelihood is that there is stress in your life from elsewhere, which is meaning that actually that intensity you were hitting before is a lot harder for you to hit, because your energy is being pulled and required elsewhere, and you're getting tired. So actually, say that was your previous 80%, your 80% may now be here, and that's okay, because that's where we're at this period of time. So if you can zoom out and really think about, why have I hit this roadblock? Pen to paper, go and write, keep writing, do not stop writing until you find that answer as to why. Your goals will also shift and change. So maybe you don't want to achieve that anymore, and that's fine. So let's sit, let's revisit. What are your priorities? What is important to you now? And how can we then change our journey and our path a little bit to get you there so that this journey is going to be enjoyable for you and you're going to get something from it rather than just beating the same old drum and you're not getting any joy or love from it. All right, role models and inspiration. You've mentioned Dame Kelly Holmes as a big influence on your early sporting journey. Today, who are the women that inspire you and how do you stay motivated on tough days? Kelly Holmes is the GOAT. I was so inspired by her growing up. Her and Paula Radcliffe were my two idols. Yes, they're both UK-based athletes. Yes, they're both runners. That is where I was at as a kid, and I idolized them. And I just thought what they were doing for sport was amazing. Now, I love Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce. I just think, again, what she's done for the sport and sport in general is incredible. To be 38 years old and still the sixth fastest woman on the planet, and she's had a baby, is incredible. And what she's shown other people by doing that is more life-changing than I think she will ever understand, and anyone will ever really be able to fully comprehend what these women in sport are doing for women, men, everyone around the globe in and out of sport. So those three are the three that really, really come to mind when I think about inspiration. But athletes as a whole are inspiring to me because they get injured, they have setbacks, but then they go and get a new world record. And you can see, even if you aren't into sport and you're not an athlete, when you see athletes have something so heartbreaking and potentially career ending as an Achilles rupture, they then have to take time out. They have to pull back, which we all find really hard when we're in momentum. And then they come back and they come back stronger. That to me is so motivating, more than any other example I can really think of, because you can copy and paste that into any single field. It's a setback, you overcome it, and you get better when you come back. So as much as those three are my top three in my head right now, any athlete, I just find them so inspiring. And that is one of the big reasons as to why She's Got Game was born. All right. You created the podcast She's Got Game to amplify female voices in sport. Why was it so important to you to start those conversations? So I mentioned Kelly Holmes and Paula Radcliffe, but actually, if I asked you to name 10 or 15 female athletes, do you think you could do that within 30 seconds? Within a minute, within 2 minutes? I don't think you could. And there are hundreds of incredible female athletes out there, yet we don't even know they exist, or they're not given the platform to share their story, and their stories are so inspiring. So that was one reason I really wanted to give these athletes a platform to share their story behind the headlines, behind the medals, behind their specific athletic journey. I want to know who you are. I want to know what makes you you, what makes you an elite athlete. How can I learn from you? And I also just want to get to know you more. And I think sometimes athletes, they're put on these world stages at the Olympics every 4 years. We see them compete one time and then that's it. But sharing their stories is just so cool to me. I also think from the listener side of things, I've spoken about it a lot already because I'm obsessed. Athletes are so inspiring and they're so relatable because they are very, very, very normal people when you sit down and you talk to them. As much as nowadays athletes have more of a celebrity status, they tend to be incredibly humble, incredibly down to earth, and they have all these personality traits that your general population person can relate to. And then it's that thing of, if they can do it, I can do it, or I can do X, Y, or Z. Okay, industry and leadership insights. You consult on fitness projects, shaping training strategies, and coach a wide range of people. What's the biggest misconception people have about training or coaching, especially for women? I would say the biggest misconception is that women can train like men. And as much as we can, I used to try and compete with the guys all the time. And don't get me wrong, sometimes I would beat them. And that was my goal because I am so competitive. However, I performed better when I trained in line with my body. So rather than there's so much science and studies and research done on the male body, which is great. But it's not just copy and paste for women. We touched on it earlier. We have these hormonal fluctuations, and rather than really trying to push through on a day where you just not got that in you, you don't need to go and then back squat at 90+% of your 1 rep max. You don't need to do that. You don't need to do that. Do that at a time where your hormones are working in your favor. Don't try and muscle through. Work with your body in a way that it needs at that moment in time, and you will perform better. I really remember when, God, I was so burnt out. I was overtraining big time. I was undersleeping, under recovering, under fueling. I was so inflamed. I was puffy. I felt horrific. I did not have much energy. I was getting through these sessions. And don't get me wrong, I was relatively strong, but I think I could have been stronger if my recovery was in a better place. I could have been stronger if I wasn't overtraining as much, if I worked in line with my hormones, if I listened to my body. And I wasn't. I was following the program as written because I felt like I had to, because when someone sets me a task, I would do it to the T and above and beyond. So I would just do it, and I wouldn't go, I need to adapt this today. I would do what I was told and I would crack on. Whereas these days, sometimes it's actually quite rare that I go in and I do the session exactly as programmed. I will adapt certain things depending on how my body is feeling, where my energy is at. And that program is my foundation. And of course, I'm going to follow a very similar format, but I may adjust a couple of things. And that is totally fine. And I think it's a really, really good skill to learn if you can. I think the other misconception is that PTs are dumb. I remember when I was first qualifying as a personal trainer, my mum was like, "You're not doing that." And her reason was, her belief was that personal trainers weren't the most intelligent people. And that is not her fault. That is what the prejudice stereotype was that had been put out into the world, is that PTs like to look at themselves in the mirror, lift a couple of weights, but there's not much going on between the ears. Some of the most intelligent people I know are trainers, they're coaches. And it's not just because of their knowledge around anatomy, it's because of their people skills. They are so emotionally intelligent. And when you pair that emotional intelligence with some kind of academic study, knowledge, understanding of whatever area you are in, that to me is creme de la creme of intelligence. So PTs are not stupid. For anyone thinking about a leadership or coaching role, what's your one piece of advice? Find out if you really want to do it. So go and get some experience. Don't just quit your job and go all in until you know you want to do it. And when you know, quit, no plan B, go all in and make it work. But prior to that point, if it's just in the ideation stage, go and get some experience, shadow someone that allows you into their world to see what the reality of it is like. Go, if you want to get into giving, I don't know, public speaking talks, go and see some and see if that's what you'd like to do. And then ask the person, what's the reality of this? Because we see so much go up on social media these days, and it is a highlight reel and it all looks glitz and glam. But when you peel back the layers, people will often tell you it's really fucking hard. So you've got to understand what you're getting yourself into before you decide to go for it. Once you've made that decision, I'm the biggest fan of going all in. Kirsty and I spoke about this on an episode of not having a plan B. Give yourself plan A. Plan B is a backup plan. And when you have a backup, you're less likely to make plan A work. So if you know you want to do it, go and do it, and do not give yourself that safety net unless you're still in that phase of experimenting and seeing if you want to do it. But when you know, get rid of that safety net, cut the cord, go all in and make it work. And the final question of today's podcast: where do you see the future of women in sport and training heading? What excites you about the direction we're going in? I think it's already really exciting. So the first 50 years of Nike were dedicated to him, and the next 50 are dedicated to her. And when you have these big global brands dedicating that much of their goal and their mission to women in sport, it is only going to grow and it is only going to improve. When Fumi Fodoju came on, she was telling us that England netball players have only just been put on salary. That is a very recent thing. So the fact that now women are able to go all in with their sport without having a second job, this is happening now. And for years it hasn't. But now they don't have to have that second job. They can fully focus on their performance. Female sport is just going to excel. We are going to see new world records. We're going to see things that have not been done before. We are going to have more role models put on more platforms, which means the younger girls and the younger generation are going to have more people to look up to. And that is just so exciting. So bring on the next 50 years plus of women in sport. I cannot wait to see where things go. Of course, I have to ask myself the question I ask every single one of our guests at the end of the interview, which is, if you had one piece of advice for your younger self, what would it be? For me, it is listen to your gut. No one knows you better than you. Do not worry about letting people down. As long as you communicate things in a respectful way, it is okay to say no. I hope you've enjoyed this very first solo episode of She's Got Game. If you have any questions, please just pop them in the comments on YouTube. Send me a message, send me a DM. I will come back to you. And if you have any questions you want answered on the next solo episode, fire them away.